These are notes 1.4 for Miss Richardson's U.S. History class. They cover unions and radical political ideas. The first thing I'd like you to do today is answer the following question. Should workers have any say in how the owner of a business runs his or her company? And defend your answer with your reasons why. So why do you think that? We'll readdress this again after we talk about unions and radical political ideas in the Progressive Era, and see if your answer is still the same, if you have more or different evidence to support why you believe what you do. And remember, you can go ahead and you can pause this right now to take your time to write down your answer. Don't be afraid to pause and control the video. You control it, not the video. So we've already examined some of the issues that were happening in the workplace at the time. We've looked at low wages, child labor as an issue, those long hours, those unfair and unsafe working conditions, the ways that people were being mistreated and disenfranchised through their jobs. Well, all of these things come together and people, those workers in the factories, those urban workers, are looking for a better life. One of the things that they look at is how can they earn that better life? And this is what attracts them to the things like unions and radical political ideas. Their lives are so bad, the conditions are so bad, they're willing to try anything to try to make their livelihoods better. And these disenfranchised workers, at the idea that unions could help improve their livelihoods and their lives, or the ideas that these radical political groups have different ideas than what's already in place, and what's in place is not working for them, they go and they join the groups. And so that's why they appeal to these groups of people. So, like I said, one of the groups that appeals to these disenfranchised workers are unions. Unions are promising to make their lives at work better, to get them higher wages, better conditions, fewer hours, a lot of things like that. So people are really attracted to these. So the definition of a union is a group that joined workers so they could work collectively to improve working conditions. So a group that joins workers together so they can work as a group to improve working conditions. That way it's not just one person trying to get a raise, all of them together are saying we want a raise. And so it's harder to deny your entire working body versus one individual. Unions appealed to many individuals, many workers. Immigrants were very attracted to these groups, and they joined the unions. And remember, I said before, immigrants often joined them after they had the job, so they worked first as scabs, they crossed union lines, then they realized how bad things were and would join the unions. However, many women and minorities were not welcome in the unions, so they changed and had to form their own unions. So the main negotiation method for these unions, these large groups of workers who banded together, and remember they would always work in the same industry. So they started as working in the same company and then it expanded to the same industry. So it might be the United Mine Workers. That was one of the unions. So all mine workers could belong to that union and the union could go to different mines. So their main negotiation method lie in the power of the group because there were so many of them. You can replace one worker easily. It's much more difficult to replace 1,000 workers at the same time because you lack people to train. So working as a group was much more effective than working as individuals. Their main tactic was to strike. So when things did not work, when they did not get what they needed through negotiation, striking shuts down the company. The company is going to make less money, and that's going to pressure them to meet the workers' demands. Now, there are some reasons strikes did not always work. But first, I do want to define strike for you. A strike is when workers collectively or as a group stop working until their demands are met. So they just refuse to work This is where you get picket lines and things like that. And once their demands are met, they go back to work. So that's your definition of a strike. Now, strikes, while an effective tool, did not always work in the early labor unions. One of the big issues that they had was the number of unemployed workers within the cities. There was always someone willing to take your job. So even though 1,000 people might strike, when 3,000 are showing up every day for jobs, you still can replace the workers. So they were unskilled jobs. You had this large available workforce to replace the workers, the strikers. You had scabs, and those are individuals who are willing to work when a strike is going on. So they're willing to work for those lower wages. They will cross picket lines and strike lines to work in the factories, even though there are these strikers there trying to get better conditions for everyone. And in fact, you benefit from the strike even if you're not a union member, because the promise is all workers will get it. Now, this can also cause a problem because if you're going to benefit, why join the union and have to deal with the problems that you're going to face with a strike? So that also is going to draw against them. The companies would hire strike busters, private police. The Pinkerton Detective Agency was very big for this. They would actually hire them to come in and physically break up or bust up the strikers to restart production. So you would have clashes, fights, riots, all kinds of things. People even got killed during strikes because they would get so violent. And union leaders, because the company bosses had the money and the pull and the sway with the police, union leaders could be arrested for things like inciting riots, disturbing the peace. So as a leader, you're taking an even bigger chance that you might get in trouble. But unions offered so much to those disenfranchised workers that so many of their lives were so difficult that they would still join the unions, because not only are the unions going to help at working conditions, they will also help workers if, say, they got hurt at work or something like that. Remember, we talked about that in class, that if you were hurt at work and couldn't work, the union would actually help pay your rent, help get you food, and help keep you safe and your family taken care of until you could get back to work. So there were huge benefits to joining the union that caused people to join, even with the problems that came with it. However, over time, as more individuals joined labor unions and more non-factory workers, middle-class individuals, things like that, became aware of the plight of the factory workers and the mine workers and these people whose lives were really unfair. They're working in those company towns that I mentioned before. So as more people became aware of the issues and more workers became part of the unions, unions gained more success because they had more support from both the public and from the workers. Now, this also ties into the increase in muckrakers and progressives, and we'll talk a little bit more about them in our next section in Unit 1. But these are the groups that are trying to promote change and trying to fix the problems of society. We're seeing all the problems right now. And so these are people like Upton Sinclair, who wrote The Jungle, that we read some excerpts from. People like Jacob Riis, who did How the Other Half Lives, those pictures in the book that we read some pieces of and looked at the pictures, the photographs. So we have these people who are trying to expose the problems, and as more of the problems get exposed by them, it actually adds to the increase in the success of unions. Now, not everyone's going to support unions. Not all Americans are going to support unions. In fact, even some workers don't support these trade unions because of some of the issues they see. Now, one of the first issues they have is the strikes. Strikes not only hurt the economy, they raise production costs, which in turn raises prices. That's going to upset many Americans who have to pay those prices. Or goods they want are unavailable, and the companies are going to promote out to the rest of America that it's because of the strikers that these are unavailable. So they get blamed for some of those problems. Strikes also, often with the strike busters and the scabs and very high tensions and very angry feelings between the two groups, they very often become violent. I told you before that people even got killed in these strikes. So when you have factories being burned and people rioting and attacks and getting shot, these do not gain Americans' support. Or like I said, even all of the workers' support. So places like, there was a big strike against the railroad, the Pullman Company. So Pullman strike is a famous one. The Homestead strike in Pittsburgh against Andrew Carnegie and his steelworks, that is a very famous one. There was a mine strike in West Virginia, Matewan. There's a thing in Colorado itself, the Ludlow Massacre is actually a strike that became violent and many people died. So these different things happen and they lose support. The other reason many Americans and workers do not support unions is that they're associated with a lot of radical political ideas. Basically, the whole idea is that the workers, not the owner, can dictate wages and hours and conditions. The worker has control, not the owner. And if you're a business owner or someone who aspires to one day be a business owner, you don't want the workers to be able to tell you what you have to pay and what kind of hours to give. You want that control. This is seen as a huge threat to capitalism, a threat to the American values, a threat to the whole American way of life, that you work hard and get ahead and you get to make those decisions for your business. So it's promoting these radical political ideas like socialism, and many Americans are very fearful of that. They see that as an idea from Southern or Eastern Europe that was brought over. It increases those anti-immigrant feelings, and they won't support the unions because they associate them with those ideas. A few of the radical political ideas that are associated with unions and striking workers are things like socialism. So socialism, by definition, is the government controls the means of production in a country for essential items. We could also say it's an economic and political philosophy where that favors government control of a business and property. So they favor government control, not individual control. A threat to capitalism, a threat to democratic values in America. Another one of the ideas that are supported by many of the unions, Marxism, also known as communism. So very similar to socialism, just a little bit more extreme, where there is only government ownership of property, no individual ownership, and everything is done for the common good and we divide it equally. A third idea, and this is even more radical, is anarchism. So we actually have some people, and not as much unions, but individuals who support anarchism, and we have these anarchist groups, and they will go to the rallies and the riots and create even more issues. This happens in one of them called the Haymarket Riot, where there are actually bombs set off at the union rally by an anarchist group, which leads to more public support against the union because it happened at their rally. So as I said before, many immigrants brought some of these radical political ideas to the United States. Things like socialism, Marxism. They actually originated and were very popular in southeastern, Eastern and Southern Europe. So like Italy, Greece, the Balkan regions, all of those areas, Poland, places like that, supported many of these more radical political ideas that the U.S. did not support. And so it became associated with immigration and actually increased our nativist argument against immigrants that they're bringing this violence and these radical political ideas and trying to undermine America. So that ties into immigration and those pieces. We also have, as you can see, I have a few things about Debs. Eugene Debs was a union worker who ran on the Socialist Party ticket, multiple times for president. He was very popular as far as the union workers go. He never won, but he's someone that became very famous and is associated with unions and socialism during this time period. So if you think about it this way, many disenfranchised workers, including the immigrants, those people who have been abused, mistreated by the system and the company bosses, they supported unions because it would make their lives better. Many unions supported socialism because it gave workers the power to control the companies. So therefore, we have many immigrants as well as many disenfranchised poor workers in America, but many immigrants support radical political ideas like socialism, and therefore candidates like Debs. So we see this happening, and that doesn't always sit well with the rest of America. To these disenfranchised workers, these radical political ideas are going to lead to better lives, more fair treatment, and that's what they believe America is about. So now that you've kind of heard about unions in the Progressive Era, you've heard about, well, the Gilded Age and the Progressive Era, you've heard about radical political ideas and how they were associated with the unions during that time, I want you to go back to that question at the beginning. Should workers have any say in how the owner of a business runs his or her company, and your defense of that answer? So do you have more support for your answer now? Do you have different support? What do you think about that question now? Did you change your mind? So kind of reassess that, look at that, and see what's changed, what you've added or taken away during these notes. And in class, we'll actually talk about some of this as well. So bring those ideas to class with you. This does end notes 1.4. We will start notes 1.5 next, which are about political machines and political bosses during the same time period.